To 1878, this bridge in the port city of Rotterdam could be temporarily...
A bridge over 100 years old in the Netherlands was almost taken apart, not because it was falling apart, but because it stood in the way of Jeff Bezos' yacht, a 400-foot-long boat with 3 masts as tall as a building. It couldn't fit under the bridge, so someone suggested, why not just remove the bridge? Sounds like a joke, but it was real, and the bridge wasn't just any bridge, it was De Hef, a historic symbol of Rotterdam. When the locals heard about it, nobody could believe it, not because it was impossible to take the bridge down, but because the reason was just absurd. Tearing down a national landmark just so a rich guy could get his yacht through. People in the city were outraged. Some were so furious they posted on Facebook, calling others to come throw eggs at the yacht. The story blew up around the world. Big media outlets covered it. Social media exploded. Hundreds of posts, thousands of comments, and all of them came back to one question. How much power does Jeff Bezos really have? In the end, the plan was quietly canceled, not because Bezos apologized, not because he backed down, but because the backlash was too strong. The yacht still got to the sea, but it happened in silence. One night, when no one was looking, no one filming, the Coral was pulled through the city without its masts, quiet, secret, as if even its owner felt embarrassed. And that was just the beginning. Because for someone like Jeff Bezos, being at the center of controversy isn't new. But this time was different. This time, people pushed back. This time, the public didn't bow down. And from that moment, the image of a tech king started to crack. Welcome to Truth Behind Fame, the channel where we don't worship wealth or power. Here, we tell the real stories, the real decisions, the real consequences behind people everyone else calls icons. And Jeff Bezos' story, it doesn't stop at a bridge. Right after the bridge came the warehouse. Not long after the Rotterdam story, an Amazon warehouse in Staten Island, New York became the center of attention. But this time, it wasn't about technology or delivery speed.
You are Amazon because of us. Yes. We need more wages. We need better pay.
It was because the workers, they were fed up, and they decided to fight back. Long hours, no real breaks, constant monitoring, even bathroom time had to be asked for. So they started organizing, calling for a union. Amazon had always been known as the kind of company that hated unions. They had lawyers, media people, entire departments whose job was to stop that from ever happening. But this time, the workers didn't back down. They organized, they rallied, they voted, and they won. For the first time in Amazon's U.S. history, a group of workers successfully formed a union. While those workers were still celebrating, people noticed something. Jeff Bezos was on his yacht. Not a metaphor. He was literally out at sea on the same $500 million super yacht that nearly got a bridge taken down. There he was, shirt open, sunglasses on, wine glass in hand, next to his girlfriend, looking tan and relaxed. And social media did the rest. Side-by-side pictures spread like wildfire. Gives one side, warehouse workers in cheap t-shirts, holding protest signs under the sun. Gives the other, Jeff Bezos smiling on deck, watching the waves like nothing else mattered. No one needed to explain anything. The contrast was obvious. People started asking, does Jeff Bezos even know what's happening in his own company? And if he knows, does he even care? He used to be seen as the nerd who built a bookstore that took over the world. Now, people called him an emperor floating above the rest of us. And that distance, it wasn't because he was successful. It was because he no longer walked on the same ground as the rest of us. While warehouse workers were still fighting for a 10-minute bathroom break, Jeff Bezos was entering a whole new chapter of his billionaire life. $1 million wedding in Venice. Not in a backyard, not at a quiet resort. He chose Venice, one of Europe's most iconic cities, also one of its most fragile. A city sinking under the weight of climate change, mass tourism, and time itself. And yet, into that city, Bezos flew in over 50 guests, on private jets, hosted multi-day parties on yachts, and lit up the sky with fireworks. Look, nobody's saying rich people can't get married. But when you're the guy funding a $10 billion climate fund, and then turn around and throw the loudest, most carbon-heavy celebration in a city barely staying afloat, people are going to talk. The wedding photos were everywhere. The bride on the yacht, the groom in a tux on a palace balcony, champagne, helicopters, flashbulbs. It looked less like a wedding, more like a royal parade. And then came the tax story, right? After the wedding, news broke. Jeff Bezos had changed his residency from Washington to Florida. He didn't say why. He didn't need to. Washington had just introduced a new capital gains tax for the super rich. Florida has no such tax. Just one change of address. And Bezos stood to save nearly $1 billion on his 2020 for stock sales. One line on a form. One signature. One state change. And just like that, $1 billion stayed in his pocket. It wasn't illegal. But for the guy who built his empire using public infrastructure, public workers, and public trust, it felt like a slap in the face. The story was no longer how rich is Jeff Bezos. The real question was, where does he even live now? On Earth? Or on a different planet with his own rules? Maybe Bezos thought all of that wouldn't matter, that his personal life was his business. But the consequences, they didn't stay personal for long. Because when his image started to feel out of touch, cold, and arrogant, people didn't just turn away from him. They started turning away from Amazon. In tech circles, stories began to pop up. Young engineers turning down offers from Amazon, others quietly quitting, not because the job was bad, but because they didn't want Jeff Bezos on their resume. They didn't want to be part of that world. And it's not like they didn't have options. These are the best minds in the industry. When they saw the company's founders sipping wine on a yacht while workers were fighting for fair pay, it just didn't sit right anymore. Customers started to feel it too. Campaigns to shop small and avoid Amazon gained traction. People started asking themselves, do I really want to keep supporting this? And that's when the government stepped in. The U.S. Federal Trade Commission launched an antitrust investigation against Amazon, accusing it of using monopoly power to hurt consumers and small businesses. The kind of case that doesn't just fine you, it can break up your company. And through all of it, one name kept coming up, Jeff Bezos. Even though he wasn't CEO anymore, he was still the face people remembered, and now, that face wasn't admired, it was resented. In a world where people care more than ever about fairness, transparency, and climate, Bezos started to look like the exact opposite. He didn't seem like the nerdy founder anymore. He looked like the problem, and the worst part, it wasn't because he failed. It was because he looked like he didn't care. There's something strange that happens when a person reaches the very top. They stop having to explain themselves. They don't need to ask for permission. They don't need applause. And maybe that's exactly when they start losing what matters most: respect. Jeff Bezos doesn't need the world's approval anymore, but the world doesn't seem to want to give it to him either. He owns rockets, yachts, islands, cloud servers, a $1 trillion empire. But each decision, whether it was the bridge, the taxes, the wedding, or the silence, made people feel like he'd stopped playing by the same rules. He didn't fall from grace. He drifted away from it, step by step, yacht by yacht, jet by jet. The $600 billion empire that Jeff Bezos built isn't collapsing overnight, but the cracks are there. Cracks made of frustration. From workers, engineers, customers, even lawmakers, people who once admired him. Now taking a step back, maybe he doesn't need them anymore. Maybe he's too far gone to notice. But if no one's cheering, no one's supporting, and no one's proud to stand with you, how strong is your empire really? Amazon still delivers. The rockets still launch. The money still flows. But the myth of Jeff Bezos? That's already starting to fade. The story isn't over. But one thing's for sure. It's no longer a fairy tale.